Good afternoon from London, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just take a few moments to let everybody join the call, and then we'll begin in a very short while. So, good afternoon, everybody. But I know we have people joining us from different parts of the world, so it might be good morning or even good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about digital ID and kind of posing the question, can governments get citizens on board? I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a kind of publishing house that works with civil servants and senior leaders all around the world. So in terms of today's topic, the development of digital IDs is one of the key building blocks, I think, for governments of the future. And it's certainly, we've identified in the work that we do in Global Government Forum and the research that we pull together, that a digital ID system is one of the key components for a government if they really want to fully embrace the kind of digital transformation and create services that kind of join up for their citizens. But it's also safe to say that in different countries and different governments around the world, there are levels of resistance and controversy when it comes to the adoption of digital IDs. So in this session, we're going to cover with our four expert speakers, we're going to cover issues like looking at some of the improvements in services, in public services that have already been unlocked, where governments are developing and implementing digital IDs, how governments have been able to gain and maintain public support for digital IDs where that has happened, and how governments can build cross-government systems behind the scenes that support the most, the digital systems that you need to support a digital ID program. We have, as I said, four great speakers with us here today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce each of our speakers and I'm going to invite them to give some short opening remarks to set the scene for our conversations today. But the webinar is also very much about you, our audience, and we want to make this a conversation. So whichever device you are using, you should see somewhere on that device a Q&A button. And please do use that Q&A function to message in your questions and your comments at any point from now on and throughout the webinar. And once we've heard from our speakers, we'll then get through as many of those questions and comments as we can before the end of today's session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our great speakers. So first we will hear from William Graves, who is Deputy Assistant Director for Futures Identity, which is at the Office of Biometric Management, which sits in the Department of Homeland Security in the United States of America. And William's responsibilities include aligning technology development with the office's strategic direction and their growth objectives, and integrating capabilities into the existing systems. Previously, William served as the Chief Biometric Engineer in the Department of Defense and the Chief Biometric Engineer at the Department of Homeland Security's US Visit Program. So he's got lots of experience on kind of biometric standards development, technical assistance to foreign countries, and working with the private sector as well and small businesses on innovation in this area. Then we will hear from Katrin Vaga, who is Head of International Public Relations for the e-Residency project in the Estonian Investment Agency, which is part of Enterprise Estonia. Previously, Katrin spent a decade as a broadcast journalist and EU correspondent, covering both investigative news and current affairs. She is a columnist as well and has consulted international organisations on R&D and communications, whilst living not just in Estonia, but also in London and Brussels. So after experiencing Estonia's digital transformation firsthand as a citizen, she's also had the opportunity personally and professionally to compare different levels of digitalization in various other EU states as well. So can bring all of that personal experience to our conversation today. And then we will head over to Finland, where we will hear from Teemu Kääriäinen, who is the Senior Advisor for Public Sector IC Department at the Ministry of Finance. Teemu is currently involved with several national and cross-border initiatives related to digital identities. These include the coordination of the national eIDAS implementation, Digital Europe programme funded large-scale piloting of the European digital identity wallets, and deployment of the Findi network, which is the National Self-Sovereign Identity Network. He's got over 15 years of experience designing, architecting, building, and deploying business-critical digital identity solutions. So lots of the technical experience there. And then last but by no means least, we will hear from Raffaele Angius, who is the Senior Advisor at the Identity Expert Team in the Directorate of Immigration in Norway. He's currently product manager for the Biometrics Identity and Personal Data Development Team. And during the past 2 years, he's also been product manager for ModPerson, which is a digital transformation project that brings together the Norwegian Directorate of Immigration, Police Service, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Immigration Appeals Board, and the Norwegian Tax Administration. So that improved system for identity management, its objective is to ensure consistency in the collection and assessment of ID data and should ultimately lead to a greatly improved workflow for identity control. So some of the benefits of having that kind of system in place. So I'm sure you'll agree with me. We have a fantastic panel of speakers here. As I said, please do take this opportunity to put any of your questions or comments to our speakers. I know digital ID is something that people have lots and lots of opinions and views about, so we want to capture all of those in today's conversation. But to kick us off, William, I'm coming over to you. I'm going to invite you to give some opening remarks.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. My name's Will Graves. I am, like I said before, the Deputy Assistant Director for Futures Identity. And what is Futures Identity? Inside of the Office of Biometric Identity Management, we look at technology 6 months to 30 years out, right? And we have 4 pillars that we actually utilize to actually help us facilitate some of that S&T. We have academic engagement. So we look at low technology readiness level technologies out there. Like if you're interested in biometrics like heartbeat from the micropixelations of your forehead, right? That's a modality that may come in the future, but that's still in a research area. Standards and blueprinting. So standards is very important, right? And when we talk about digital identity, and how can we do that federated, identity, standards are very important for that, right? So we have a standards branch. We actually participate in international standards for AI and biometrics because a lot of the use cases in AI is they use facial recognition. So we started to participate in just to make sure. And then we have our prototype and development. So we have a lot of prototypes in certain stages of development. And then the last, we actually have a pillar called transition because in the United States, the Army calls it the Valley of Death, right? You have a very good S&T project, and then how do you transition that to the programs of record? And usually a lot of those, the S&T things, they die, right? Because the programs don't really want this new tool, right? There's humans are resistant to change sometimes, right? And so sometimes the being an innovator is quite hard. But across the department, we have multiple use cases for digital identity, right? So we do everything from law enforcement, interdiction, Border Patrol, the Coast Guard, to CIS, which is, getting refugees into the country, right? And so we have lots of disparate digital identity things happening inside the department. And we are actually working with the Science and Technology Division right now to look at all of the use cases and the gaps across the department for digital identity, so we can actually fund those gaps and make sure that if somebody's doing something well at TSA, we could actually use that service, let's say for Border Patrol or CBP. We also, the importance of being able to establish someone's ID, right? Coming from a biometric background, we think that biometrics should be part of that, but there are use cases for biographic, right? So you can actually get like a GSA, a login.gov account with just your driver's license, right? But using that biometric binding to actually verify the identity of somebody, we think is very important, which is why the Office of Biometric Identity Management is part of this. And then there are plenty of opportunities and challenges that we were talking, before. There's a lot of mistrust in not only the government, but actually in the technologies as well. And that's where some of the standards actually, will come to, help, right? Facial recognition has taken it on the chin since about 2018, at least in my country, about it being biased, statistically biased, not, as other people use bias in a different context. But, and so the challenges of utilizing that technology as their executive orders and laws in Congress and Senate to actually ban the use of facial recognition in the United States. How do we make sure that there is equity and choice for people who are going to be using these digital services moving forward? So
William,
that's it for me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's a great way to start, because I think you've highlighted a lot of the kind of overarching issues that I think we'll unpick in our conversation. So really interesting to hear about some of the future potential, I think, for biometrics and some of the things that you're currently exploring. But that issue of standards, the importance of standards. So within a country like America, obviously the importance of consistency across the states, but also I think as we're bringing together people from different countries, the importance of having standards, global standards as well, when it comes to kind of digital IDs, really interesting and really important. We'll probably hear from our other speakers about what's going on in the EU on that level. Also, you mentioned there how digital ID can play a part across lots of different policy areas. So it has uses in a whole range of policy areas. And then bringing in, I think, that issue, which will definitely come up in our conversations, the importance of trust. And I think in countries, the different levels of trust are probably reflected in how far people or governments have gone on their journey with digital IDs. So as you say, both a kind of lack of trust in the technology itself, but also maybe in the government and how it's using that technology. And so lots of challenges there for governments to kind of gain the trust, I think, of their citizens when it comes to deploying some of these new technologies. Thank you so much, William. Great place to start. Katrin, I'm coming over to you now to hear what's been happening in Estonia.
I'm representing Estonian government program, e-residency, and e-residency is nothing else than also a digital ID, but for foreign citizens, non-residents of Estonia, because Estonia has had a digital ID mandatory and like a fully developed set of digitally available government services already for nearly 30 years. So this is something that is very common practice for us, and has made Estonia, I would say, almost free of bureaucracy as a society. And 10 years ago, we decided that we can offer the benefits also for foreign entrepreneurs, the possibility to apply for digital ID, and if they want, then create a company or give digital signatures that are fully secure and recognized throughout the EU. So we have been doing it now for 10 years, and maybe for me, as somebody who has grown up during this period of digital transformation in my own country, I have seen how this digital identification system was built step by step, along with actually really serving citizens first and foremost. How everything was done so that that every participant of our society would win from the experience. And I'm very excited to be in the same panel with people who are working with the future of digital identity and the possibilities that technology is allowing us today, because we also in Estonia and in e-residency, we are looking forward to developing a cardless solution for also non-residents who are interested in e-residency, and we are preparing for innovations in the face of EU digital wallet adoption, so that it would give us a boost to really test the new technology and see how we can, whilst preserving the same level of security as Estonian digital ID is rated as the most secure among the EU digital identities according to eIDAS, to preserve the same security level and the data protection, and but really make it more user friendly and even easier to use. Today, I have to say that me as an Estonian citizen, I use my digital ID almost exclusively through app. Our digital ID saves us individually about 5 days per year, in terms of just shared time that we would otherwise spend on some paperwork or filling out different applications or government documents. So this is, it's a lot of efficiency that it has created in the society and citizen level, and also for organizations.
Katrin, thank you so much. I mean, it's fascinating to hear. I think Estonia's always, put forward as kind of the front runner in digital. And it's interesting to hear that you've had a mandatory digital ID for nearly 30 years. I'm interested what our audience from different countries think about that, and whether you could introduce that in the countries that they are listening from. But as you say there, some of the ways that Estonia went around this, so it went about this, placing citizens at the heart of that journey, making sure that everything that they did on this digital journey was about benefits for the citizens, so putting the public right at the heart of this program. But as you say, flagging up security has to be really, really a priority. So it's held up as one of the most secure systems. Data protection, really important. And can you maintain that level of security around the program and the data as you expand, then as you become something that's shared with other countries? And then interesting what you said there about using digital ID mainly on your app, so mobile now really the way forward, and how it's leading to those big benefits in terms of efficiency and time savings, which will be for the citizen but also for the public. So lots and lots of benefits there. Thanks so much, Katrin. And you mentioned the kind of EU digital wallet, so I'm sure we will hear more about that. And on that, Teemu, I'm coming over to you to hear what's happening in Finland.
Thanks, Shaban, and thanks for having me. Looking for a great discussion. I'm Teemu Kääriäinen, Senior Advisor from the Finnish Ministry of Finance. We're coordinating the national implementation of the eIDAS regulation revision, and I'm chairing the functional working group in our national eIDAS implementation project. I hope that you're familiar with the eIDAS regulation, but for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the EU regulation that deals with cross-border e-identification and digital trust services. I'm also the national coordinator of the Finnish involvement in the Digital Europe program funded large-scale piloting consortia, where we are piloting the European Digital Identity Wallets, or EUDI wallets, in several use cases, such as mobile driving license, education, travel, and cross-border business. And it's obviously safe to say that we consider the eIDAS regulation revision and the EUDI wallets as a very important initiative to promote the cross-border interoperability of digital identities in the EU. We initiated our national eIDAS implementation project in April 2024. The project is coordinated by the Ministry of Finance, and we have actually tasked the Finnish Digital Agency, DVV, to implement the Finnish public sector wallet for natural persons. And it's been actually progressing really nicely. And for instance, through the active participation in the cross-border pilots, we have now available a functioning demo wallet implementation that is aligned with the latest specifications from the eIDAS expert group. Even though our focus is in EU, there should not, however, be any reason why we should rule out the possibility to further extend interoperable digital identities to other regions outside of EU. And luckily, the European Commission has been very active in engaging in discussions with their counterparts in the US and in Canada. And we also see the OECD digital identity recommendation as an important driver for the interoperability on a wider scale than just within EU. Obviously, the cooperation with the different standardization bodies and digital identity initiatives, such as OpenID Foundation and Open Wallet Foundation, are also important drivers for the more widespread interoperability of digital identity wallets. Currently, Finland hosts a national eID scheme with strong eID means provided jointly by public and private sectors, including Finnish banks, mobile operators, and the government. And this kind of an approach has allowed us to build a robust and widely adopted national eID ecosystem, which benefits both the public and private sectors, which have been digitalizing their services. And we really see it very important that digital identity solutions are developed together between the public and private sectors. Finland has not only focused on digital identities for citizens, but has also taken the action to promote digitalization of services for legal persons, such as companies. And the current solutions build on the concept of representation, where legal persons are represented by a natural person. And the same representation-based model is in use for other types of users who may have difficulties gaining access to a digital identity, such as minors or elderly people or people with disabilities. And as such, we see it very important that digital identities should be enabled for different types of user groups. Basically, an area where we are currently lacking capabilities is really the cross-border interoperability. And basically, the eIDAS regulation has been in place for several years, but it really hasn't materialized the true benefits of a digital single market, both for individuals and companies. And this is obviously an area where we are envisioning the revised regulation and the wallets to bring great benefits. Finally, obviously what you said, Shaban, the trust in public sector is generally very high in the Nordics and Baltics, which is one factor for the wide-scale adoption of digital identity solutions, for instance, in Finland and Estonia. We, however, acknowledge that this is not the case everywhere, and there's kind of a no one-size-fits-all solution to promote digital ID adoption across the globe. Even though we strongly support digital identities being implemented with highest level of security, privacy, and data protection, they should also carefully balance between usability and security. We see that the usability is really a key enabler for the wide-scale adoption of digital IDs, which should be carefully considered when defining the requirements. Additionally, we see it important that we should give users the possibility for choice and not to force them to any single solution. Concerning EUDI wallets, we're obviously looking after a viable ecosystem with wallets being provided both from public and private sectors. And this obviously means that the private sector needs to have a viable business model to be part of the ecosystem.
Teemu, thank you so much. Really interesting to hear the work that's going on at the EU level. And as you say, that real push to have a system that works across borders in the EU. But as you say, some challenges still there. And I think when we come on to the questions, it might be interesting to unpick that a bit, whether those challenges are more to do with systems and technology, or whether it's also cultural kind of systems that are getting in place and people. Be interesting to think about that a bit more. But again, you bring in some other aspects that we haven't heard from our previous speakers. So a digital ID that works not just for the public sector, but also the private sector, so that if you really want citizens just to have one digital ID, it needs to work across kind of all sectors there. And again, picking up, I think, one of the issues that we did touch on earlier. So the importance of making sure that a digital ID is inclusive, that everybody can have access to a digital ID. And I think that the risk of a digital divide opening up, I think really something that we are all thinking about, and I think need to pay real attention to. So we can come on to that maybe when we talk a bit more. But thank you so much, Teemu. Lots obviously happening, lots been done, but as you say, still work to do on some of those issues, in particular, the cross-border interoperability. Raffaele, we're coming over to you now to see what's going on in Norway.
I'm the last one, so many of the main points that I had in my opening remarks have been touched upon by the other participants, and that's I'm grateful for that, because it means that it will be shorter. But let me start with saying that digital identity is, as we know, it's already here. It simplifies our daily life all the time. That's something that we see. It has been mentioned by Katrin. I think it's we use it every day, especially in the Nordic countries. It's like you don't live without it, basically. But it's interesting to see a little bit beyond the words. I would like to just specify what I mean when I talk about digital identity or electronic identity. Because as of now, the definition of digital identity is very functional and commercial in most cases. So let me explain. It's more commercial than institutional. I'm a government man, and I'm very. We are all public officials here, so we should be very aware of that difference, and we should be very aware of the fact that this is like there is a divide in perception. Let me explain what I mean here. If I talk about digital ID in Norway to a fellow citizen, the person I'm talking to will immediately think about bank ID or bypass or confidence, and these are all commercially issued identity solutions that serve the purpose of identifying you in certain settings for specific needs. Mm-hmm. There is a huge difference between that kind of solution and a traditional ID. Like with my ID card, I have access basically to, I'm just being identified as a person that I am. Like that's a proof of who I am. That's completely different. It's not access to any service. But this is, of course, this is like one thing. And the other is that it's very common to talk about digital identities in plural. So you're not only Raffaele, but you're a student, a mother, a library user, a swimmer, the owner of a house, and so on. It may seem that I'm going in a totally different direction here, but I will come to the point very soon. But this adds complexity, because a user, the citizen, usually is the person needs to use an ID for different purposes. And what has been the standard up to now is that this is actually the case. It's like, you know, we're talking about an EU wallet. A wallet is like just like that. You have in the wallet, you have money, you have an ID, and you have a library card. Well, there is no mother card, but just, yeah, swimming pool card and all that stuff.
Yeah.
The proper electronic ID in the strictest sense of the word does exactly what it should do. It provides proof of who you are. And that's the basic purpose. So I'm seeing that bank ID, for instance, has been experimenting for the past 6 months or something with giving you access to store your passport or ID card credentials in the app. That's fantastic. I can go to the shop and buy a bottle of wine. In Norway, there is an age limit, and I can identify myself through the passport if I'm asked to. That interesting thing is that if you open a website in Bank ID, they say we cover 99% of the market and 840 million transactions per year. So this means like 2.5 million roughly transactions per day. That's huge. But 99% of the market, as they say, it's like 4.5 million users. Now here I see a first problem. There's 5.5 million people in Norway. So how is that 4.5 million makes 99% of the market? There is a discrepancy here. We're not talking about citizens. We're talking about consumers. And that's something that we should be very, very interested in, and we should have as a starting point. Government, we're talking about citizens. So we need to be sure that, as it has been mentioned previously, like inclusion is priority number one, for instance. There are other things as well, other shortcomings with this system, like money laundering legislation means that bank can unilaterally withdraw your ID on the basis of suspicious activity or something like that. And that's a police task that's being administered by a bank functionary. And then you do have this problem. This type of solution may not be available to certain groups. So that's, again, it's a problem of inclusion, right? So with the eIDAS directive, this will change because we will have a single standard for a solution that allows you to have both ID and other credentials in a single system. So it unifies, in a way, these two things. Social impact will going to be huge. And we are getting prepared to that. We are implementing we have a couple of prototypes, pilot projects that we are doing in Norway to go to work that goal. But let me say just a couple of things about what I think is important to have in place to go down that road. First of all, we have mentioned inclusion, all of us. We have mentioned convenience. It must be easy to use the eID, otherwise you have no business in that. Trust or acceptance has been mentioned, like the digital identity credential must be accepted as equally valid as the paper-based ones. It must be the same. And the perception of the public must go in that direction. So we have some selling what to do down there. Trust, of course, like you have to trust that the information provided there is valid. And talking about that, data quality is paramount. Like my role as the Norwegian Director of Immigration is like I am the product manager for our slice, basically, of the National Registry of the Population, which is the National Registry of Immigrants in my case. Like when we were restructuring our database, you have no idea what we found when it comes to data. So poor data, that's gonna taint the whole experiment. So that was my and an underlying service infrastructure. That was the last point. We have to be ready with our services. Like we cannot just roll out some digital identity systems that, well, then you use it for what? These and these and these. And what about the rest of the public services? Like that part needs to be in place before we roll out the EIDs. So that was the remark. Sorry for being taking a little more time than I
Raffaele,
thought.
That's fantastic. So I think you've brought in different angles. You've given us lots of food for thought there. So I think the way you describe that as we don't think of ourselves as just one ID. So we've got lots of different kind of identities and how you bring all that together. I like the way you describe the wallet as including different things. So it's got the digital ID, which is like the proof of who you are, but then all those little other things in there, like the library card and the swimming baths and all of those kind of things in there. And I think in the public's mind, this is all kind of one big noise, I think. So it's kind of hard to kind of unpick that for a member of the public. I completely agree. The issue around the private sector maybe needing wanting digital IDs for particular reasons, which aren't the same as why the government wants it. So the solutions have to be different, and we need to be very mindful of that as well. And then the things that you've said there, the foundations that you need to have in place for a good digital ID system. So inclusive, easy to use, but picking up on Teemu's point, if you want it to be very secure, you have to balance that against making it easy to use. So there's some kind of trade-offs there, I think, as well. Has to be trusted, and it has to be as valid as your paper kind of proof as well. And then absolutely those issues around the data has to be the highest possible quality. And if you're raising expectations about what digital ID can do, all of your service infrastructure has to then be in place, and you have to be able to use your digital ID, I think, in a whole host of ways. So I think lots and lots of food for thought there. I do have some questions on my own, but one came in. So thank you to all of you for setting the scene. I think you've flagged loads of questions, but Emmanuel Sherin has already sent in a question. which, Katrin, I see you've provided an answer, but I'm going to ask this question to everybody so everybody can see it. So Sharon has said, which I like this question, do any of your digital ID-based services enable citizens as well as government to access data directly? So, for example, can citizens access the data an organization has about them, which might be, as Emmanuel is saying, which is a citizen's right? So, for example, William, I'm going to throw this to you. Say you've introduced a facial recognition scheme somewhere. Does the fact that scheme is in place mean that a member of the public has more right to ask what data is being collected about them on that system?
So we have a process where anybody can kick off and ask the government what we have stored. So we do have a process where, let's say, if you come into the country, we've taken your data attributes from your passport and your physical, your face and your fingerprints. You can actually come to our organization and say, I would like to see what you collected on me, right? And then we are mandated by law to provide that information out unless there's some reason to protect it, right? We do, that process goes through our policy shop. It also goes through our privacy shop, because sometimes we have reporters who come in and ask for a boatload of information, and we do not allow anybody to actually get that information. So if you specifically ask for it, you'll probably get passed. If there's a public organization, or you won't get anything. We'll say thank you, but no thank you, right? We're not going to provide you information.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And is it the same? So, Katrin, you've said in your reply that like William is saying there, the individual has the right to ask for information about what data is collected on them, but different organizations can't necessarily ask for all of that data.
No,
share that
I think big difference between how Estonia has been very successful in adopting digital ID and how the trust is, also why the trust is so high among the population. The big difference between the other countries who have tried to adopt the digital ID, as also in Europe, is that they don't look the personal data protection as or at least didn't look at this as such a big need. So basically the digital identity infrastructure was developed in Estonia already by making it a law that actually everybody owns their own data. Every individual owns their own data. This is the key. So the transparency works both ways. For me, when I log into my government portal, where I am as a citizen, I have one profile. Just to tell it simply, I have different sections there. For me, the healthcare related, my prescriptions, everything regarding to taxes, voting, I don't know, family situation, benefits. And I can see who has accessed my data. For example, if I have given the permission for my GP to look at my data or previous prescriptions. I can see it. I can see their numbers there. And I'm actually I'm the only one in the whole chain who has the full view of this kind of dashboard.
Yeah.
Other government organizations don't have this. So, and because the digital ID in Estonia has it's 99% of all the services, and also for private services, I use digital ID to access my bank account and various other services and transportation, public transportation, stuff like that. I can operate with the digital ID. So it's it's necessary to really ensure that there is no violation by all these other agencies or organizations. So this has been, and it's taken very seriously. We do have, because it's been a long time we have used digital ID. We do have cases when the data, there is a data violation by somebody, some police officer is checking the data that they are not supposed to check. It's a very serious offense in Estonia. So these cases have been made into examples, so everybody knows that this is not the way it works.
Yeah. Well, on that issue of kind of security, I guess, and that, I think this links to the trust issue. How safe
Yeah.
is your data in these systems? So another question has just come in from Elizabeth. I'm going to put this to you, Teemu. So when people log in to different services, so banks and etc., with an EID or a digital ID, is there a biometric identification need in the login system to prevent ID theft? So can somebody else log in using your ID, your digital ID, or does it have to be a biometric step in there?
Well, it obviously depends on the EID means that is being used to access the service, and they actually function on multiple levels of assurance. So, like Katrin said, in Estonia, basically all digital transactions use the highest level of assurance, whereas in Finland, for instance, the EID means issued by the banks and the mobile operators function on a slightly lower level of assurance, so on the substantial. And it basically depends on the EID means provider, what kind of factors they are requiring. So anyway, we're talking about a multi-factor authentication. So there's always at least two factors from the what you have, what you know, or what you are. And quite often when dealing with mobile EID means, they take advantage of the biometric capabilities of the mobile devices to conduct the biometric check. But basically, another point in the issuing of the EID means is that it is based on the individual's kind of national ID. So basically, the original issuance of the EID means has to have been done in such a manner that the person has been identified with sufficient level of assurance.
Thanks. So Raffaella, I'm going to come to you for both of these questions really in Norway. So are there concerns around the kind of data privacy aspects and how secure are the systems? And also, can people access in the way that Katrin was saying they can access their own data? Is that similar in Norway as well?
Both yes and no. Let me first address the security part. We have, as said, recently. Okay, wait a second. If we're talking about digital ID, or are we talking about the data in possess of the public sector?
I think the question was, does having a digital ID make it easier to access the data that the public sector holds about you?
Well, the short answer is we hope we will in the future. Because right now we're not there yet, but that's we have a goal of having, at least at the Director of Immigration, we are starting out the project Min Side, my page, which is going to give our users access of their direct access of their own data. Of course, they can call us, they can make an access request to access the data, but as of now, we haven't had a solution for accessing data directly. And I'm not talking about personal data only, but also data regarding their application status and so on. That's one thing, but we couldn't do that before because of the database structure. So what we did in the past 2 years was that we really restructured the whole, part of the database architecture and service architecture. Let's say the infrastructure of how this database and systems talk together, to keep it very simple and very basic, so that we could have we had like as Polar Star, being as in Norway, a Northern Star was 1, data quality, 2, protection of data, and 3, security of data. So that was the overhaul of the personal and what we did with the National Registry of Foreigners. Of course, that tax administration, that's the ones that hold ownership of the National Registry of Citizen in general, they have done this work before, so
Yeah.
we're coming after. And when it comes to our side, we are soon to be opening data access to the public, to the users. That access will still happen with one of these providers of digital identity that are around right now, for instance. Like it can, but it will go through a public service infrastructure as well. So it's that's important to think. It's so security is just as good as a technology that gives us possibility to build things, and there will always be some flaws, and there will always be the possibility to hack inside some system. But I mean, encryption is very strong, so our databases are strong. And besides, I mean, I got my wallet stolen in London once, and there was my driver's license. I mean, that's kind of pretty common.
Yeah. I can't believe that in London. Never happens in London, Raffaele. Never.
It never happens in London, right? But do you know what? That's an important thing. Since we're talking about this episode in my life, let's say just one important thing that it really makes me really in favor of digital identity, for instance. Well, my driver's license it still is Italian, because I'm an Italian and Norwegian citizen, and I am resident of Norway. Do you have any idea of what did I have to go through to get the license back? It took me months. It was impossible. So that's with a digital ID, you have that solution already. It's the credential is there. You just have to download it to a new device, whatever.
Yeah. Thanks, Raffaele. Will, I want to come back to you on this issue of kind of the data privacy, and maybe again it links to, I guess, in the United States, like in the UK, we don't have a kind of mandated digital ID scheme. And one of the reasons for that is, I think, because there is quite a lot of pushback from the public. Do you think the public is worried about organizations sharing that data? So, for example, we recently had a conference here in London where we had somebody from our National Health Service saying they know a red line for the public is they don't want the health service to share their data with work and pensions, for example. They just don't want that connection to be made. Or do you think people are more worried about one department using that information in a biased way, for example? Or is it all of those concerns? What are the concerns that people have, do you think?
Well, there is a lot of distrust for the government, right? And we actually have a lot of information, right? And internally into DHS, we have had to set up privacy protections, based on the 1974 law, right? Our law is 50 years old. It desperately needs an update, right? You guys have GDPR, at least the EU does. And so, you guys are much further ahead of the United States on privacy. But internally, I liked that the person owns the data. I think that's a fantastic concept. And that would be one that I would like to, as a lessons learned, bring back to the United States, because it's in the United States, the collector of the data owns it, right? So you don't actually own your own data. That's why you have to go through that FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act process. Right. Like, look at what have they collected on me, and is it right? But yeah, so internally, even in DHS, so, like I said before, we have people who are out on the border, and CBP who's, at the airports and other, land border, entry and exit facilities. But then we also have like CIS and refugees. So the biometric system that DHS has, created, called the ident system, we have all these data sharing rules, and there are rules for like the CIS refugees that CBP can't even see. So there is data that DHS has collected in one component that another component cannot see, right? Yeah. And we built it that way to make sure that we would get some buy-in, because when the United States created, biometrics for coming into the country, there was a lot of pushback, right? And we had to be very transparent. And we had to tell everybody what we're doing with your data. And these are all the data protections that we're going to have, right? We have a very robust data management, data governance section that does nothing but make sure that we don't, share our data illegally, because we also have the system, connected to international partners as well.
Right.
So protecting the data, protecting, that the privacy of that individual is paramount, right? I can't do anything. I can't do any data sharing. I can't even do a collection without actually going through our privacy and policy shop first to make sure that we're not going to violate any laws. And especially with facial recognition, there is a large portion of this country that does not want facial recognition to be utilized by the government. They think it's a surveillance state, right? They look at the YouTube videos on China and how China is using facial recognition or maybe DNA to control their population, and they think that would happen in the United States. It's not, but there's a large pushback on the use of biometrics, especially facial recognition, and so. And a lot of these digital identity, use cases is using face because face is very easy to collect, right? Yeah. It's not iris that you have to pay for in your eye or illumination of your eyeballs, and it's not fingerprints, right? So you don't have until they get contactless fingerprints where people, and they're getting there. We've done pilots, but you can just take a picture of your fingerprints and maybe use that. But right now, large pushback on the government sharing data because what they don't want is I come in and get a green card, and then the DHS provides all that information to the Social Security Administration or the IRS, and people just start, getting really concerned about all the information the government collects on you and then sharing it internally, and then externally is forbidden almost. But a lot of people don't understand that.
I mean, it is fascinating, everything that you say there about kind of the resistance to things like facial recognition in some countries. And yet people will quite happily, I think, if they buy a smartphone, use facial recognition on that phone, for example. And I just wonder, linking to the trust issue. So the question that came in from Mohammed is, and Katrin, again, you've answered this one live, but in Estonia, the question was, did you build your digital ID platform from scratch, or did you do it in partnership with technology companies, so with private companies? And I wonder if bringing in a private company helps with the trust issue, but also just from a technology point of view, maybe governments don't have the capability to do it as well, maybe, as a private sector. So my question to all of you, and I'll come to you first, Raffaele, on this one, is does Norway work in partnership on its digital ID schemes with the private sector, or do you try and create a bespoke solution within government?
Well, there are several actors that are working on this prototype that I mentioned. It's basically the municipality of Oslo. There is a consultancy, and there is a firm that is mostly involved in the technological part, and there is us, and I don't remember who else. But it's what we are doing is like we have identified user case, so we are experimenting with some, and there is the University of Oslo, of course, because they are acting as, let's say, they are acting as the user group, like the client of the solution. Right. So in short, the product is about having a single, easier workflow for applicants of work permits. And what we have noticed is like the potential in this approach that is like based on the wallet technology and wallet work and wallet attribute construction, let's say, is that it's just as convenient as it gets. You can cut waiting time from 6 months down to 2 or 3 weeks, and basically all applications that get processed in 3 weeks. But we have even another workflow that is a fully automated workflow for that's a bit different thing. It's not wallet based, but it's still digital identity based. So if you have a digital identity like bank ID, for instance, and you're Nordic citizens. So let's say you're from Sweden, you can just apply for Norwegian citizenship with that digital identity, and the workflow from there will be fully automated. And honestly, it's like the economic impact and the convenience of that is just, it's impossible to overestimate. Usual waiting time for citizenship application was up to 2 years or even more. We had a couple of examples of this waiting time going down to 1.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. If that isn't impressive, that's, again, that's secure. And it's like we trust who issued those identity credentials. It's and we trust that particular group.
Yeah.
So that's what enables that. And little by little, by experimenting and like prototyping and finding out what can go wrong and what is right, then you gain a little more confidence as well as government. And of course, just to go back to your question, yes, we do have a long history of partnership with private sector. It's just it's very common in Norway, and it's probably going to be what brings us to the next level as well. I'm confident about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Raffaele. Teemu and William, you can both, if you want, come in on the oh, I think we might have just, William's connection might have gone off. But if anybody else wants to come in on anything to do with partnerships and the importance of partnerships with the private sector, please do. But I do want to come back as well to that important issue of kind of inclusivity, because one of the things that strikes me, in particular, when you're talking about vulnerable groups, so for example, maybe people with disabilities or the elderly in particular, we know from a lot of the work, we know from a lot of the work we do that the elderly struggle with kind of digital services. So I just want your thoughts on how do you make sure that when you're bringing in a digital solution that might involve having a digital ID, that everybody can access those services. Teemu, you raised this first, then I'll come to Katrin and then Will on this one. So Teemu, how do you actually make sure that everybody can be brought along on this journey?
Yeah, that's obviously a great question, and basically how we have been dealing with that problem domestically is through delegation. So basically, the individuals who are struggling to access digital services, whether it's minors or elderly people or people with disabilities, they basically have the possibility to give a kind of an authorization to another person to act on their behalf. That's obviously the number one thing. So basically, elderly people, for instance, may use their children, or children can use their parents to gain access. Obviously, the second key point is to make the EID means as usable and accessible as possible. So basically, this usually means kind of a mobile EID solution, because especially for individuals with disabilities, quite often the mobile device is a very user-friendly way for them to access digital services. That may be a surprise, but actually they are very digitally advanced when you have discussion with them. So I think that with those kind of approaches, and I would still like to raise the public-private kind of partnership, because basically we couldn't have gotten to the level of EID adoption in Finland without the support from the private sector, because they are basically quite often the innovators on this area, and they can provide the solutions that may provide improved usability or kind of new capabilities that the government implemented solutions do not necessarily offer, even though it's quite often the government who should implement the inclusivity kind of to the fullest extent when offering the government e-services.
Thanks, Teemu. Katrin, you're building on what Teemu says there about like inclusivity and maybe delegation, giving somebody else authority to help you with your. Does that not open up in itself, though, some concerns around security and maybe a system that could be vulnerable to abuse, for example?
Well, this issue was actually addressed quite early on in our digital transformation journey. So Estonia as a digital society is quite known, but not many people know what came before that. There was a campaign on a political level and by the government called, today it's known as Tiger Leap. So it was essentially about equipping all the community centers and Estonian schools with computer rooms and making sure that there were free classes, free like access ensured for everybody, for elderly as well as for the young people. So we had this kind of educational campaign already in late 90s. Mm-hmm. It was quite remarkable that by 97, fittingly 97% of Estonian schools were so we call computerized, right? So throughout the process of adopting digital ID, it was a little bit difficult, obviously, at the beginning when it was decided to be made mandatory. But it was helped with the fact that actually the government developed very quickly the user cases. We know that the first time people were voting online, it was 2005. It was the European Parliament elections in Estonia. And it has, today, like 2/3 of the people vote online. You only go to the voting box if, as a celebration, as something special to do. You don't need to do it, and people can vote anywhere because, when I was in London, I was voting for my Estonian elections from there. But anyway, yes, it's kind of, I do believe that the elderly, they do rely on the younger generation. But when I see my parents who are both in their 70s and they have been running their own company for nearly 30 years as well, they are actually very computer savvy, and they are using a lot the mobile ID, and in a way they are also, they have been educated throughout the process. The process has taken long, and as Teemu also said, it's very true that the mobile identification apps and we talk about the digital inequality a lot, but in a way also the digital society allows a lot more equality, among the vulnerable groups. If you take a different perspective, you just need to bring them on board, make sure that they have access to free education, help, all of this. And yeah, it's just, I think it was a matter of luck back at the time that it really was largely taken care of earlier on, but yeah.
Thanks, Katrin. Will, I'm going to come to you, your thoughts on the kind of inclusivity point. And I'm just wondering what I'm noticing in the UK, where we don't have one digital ID system, is we're ending up kind of with companies, you end up having multiple digital IDs. So you kind of have a different digital ID to do different things. You mentioned, Raffaele, for example, going to the swimming pool. I know my parents now have to have a kind of digital card, a digital number to be able to book a swimming slot, for example. And I just wonder if we're making it harder for people who maybe struggle with digital services, in particular where we don't have one digital system.
Right, and it's even worse when you have government services and you have multiple, right? Yeah, and so for inclusivity, we have the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it's called 508 compliance, right? So you cannot have, let's say, a website that somebody who is disabled, if they can't access it, if the text can't be read to them by one of those readers, it's special coding to actually have that. You can't deploy that as a government service. It's mandatory. We have the American Disabilities Act as well, which also has more constraints on what for inclusivity and for everybody. Everybody should be able to access government sites. And because of facial recognition being kind of pushed into digital identity, we also have the NIST, publications for digital identity guidelines, and they talk about, equity and accessibility as well. So that's in those standards. So if you're actually looking to actually public or private, you must have some of these things in there, right? And we talk about deterring fraud and advanced threats. So if you're going to incorporate a biometric, as identifying, a binder, then you must have some sort of liveness or presentation attack, right? Because, Apple, when they came out first with their, face to get onto your phone, they, within hours, somebody had cracked the facial recognition system because they just took a photograph of their face, printed it out on a printer, and just held up their 8x, their piece of paper, and it unlocked the phone, right? So you can't have that, right? So there are things that for government services that we're going to have to implement where sometimes the private sector does not. Now we do have ID.me in the United States, which does provide a lot of digital identity services to state and federal programs. There was a big thing where ID.me was starting to work with the IRS, and they integrated face, and that led to a very large, let's say, pushback by the public of, I have to provide my face to a corporation that doesn't have the governmental protections, right, to access my government information. How do I pay taxes, right? I actually liked it. I had my identity stolen, and somebody, filed fraudulent taxes. And so for 5 years, it was a nightmare for me. I had to go through multiple steps just to pay my taxes because somebody had decided that, they were going to file and get a large return. But there's no check on actually the filer actually doing that, right? So, so the IRS still uses ID.me as a private corporation for some things. They're not taking facial recognition anymore. You can access the IRS. They have VA. You can access your records from the VA. This is this private company providing services to the government, so you can access your own information. And actually, I use them because ex-military, there are multiple military discounts across the United States. And if you sign up for this digital service, you get access to all sorts of discounts across multiple companies. So so lots of disparate systems. In the United States, we're still we're so big, we're still trying to catch up. We're still trying to figure out who's doing what to whom and those gaps, and try to do that federated query. And the technology is here, but on the federal side, it's getting those policies and privacy documents in place that we could actually start sharing that data.
Yeah.
Because just because you're another government agency doesn't mean that we're just going to share data with you.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good, I'm looking at the time. I can't believe how fast our time has gone. So I think we've got time for one more round of questions to all of you. And building on what Will just said, I think that the question that I want to put, so we mentioned at the beginning, all of you have mentioned kind of wanting more interoperability, whether that's within a kind of country, within a government, so across organizations, or whether it's across international borders. So my first question is, do you think the biggest challenges around getting greater interoperability are more around people and cultures and wanting to keep things in your own silos, so those kind of barriers, or are they around the technology and systems not being able to speak to each other? That's my first question. What are the biggest barriers? But the second thing as well is, we mentioned trust, that's come up a lot. And so I'm wondering whether Raffaele, Katrin and Teemu have any advice for countries like America and the UK, and how do you build trust, do you think, so that we can speed up maybe our digital ID journey? So I will come to Katrin first. Your thoughts on what are the biggest challenges and any advice on building trust? And we've probably got about 30 seconds each, I'm afraid.
We compared Estonia with Spain earlier this year. We looked at their digital identity system and the digital ID card that is also existing, is functioning well, but what are missing are user cases. And people, and it's not mandatory, and people just don't use it. They don't sign up for it, and they don't do it because it's not relevant for them. They are not incentivized to do it. So Estonia, in Estonian case, I can do everything with my digital ID. I can sign the papers. This is stronger than my physical signature, and essentially, it has been made so necessary for people. And Estonians are even competing to get their tax returns, tax declarations filed because it's so easy and fast. They have been doing it for 20 years. For government, it's good because it increases the community participation. And for people, it's they prefer to do it digitally because they can get the tax return a few months earlier. So, you need to find the win-win situation. You always need to think about how you incentivize people turning to the digital. So, and if if security is ensured, you get the trust. So I would say like this.
Thanks, Katrin. So really communicate some of those benefits, and that helps with the incentives, I think. Raffaele, your thoughts? Building on anything Katrin said about building trust, but also your thoughts on what are the biggest barriers to interoperability?
Like when it comes to interoperability, I think that will be soon probably a non-issue anymore, at least in Europe, because new standard of EIDAS, everybody's kind of going in that direction, and you will need to accept that credential across countries and across services. So we are going to have standardized forms of digital ID and attributes. So that's going to help a lot. And when it comes to when you were talking also about interoperability across government services, and that's where I see that we do have some way to go still. It's not that easy because we do have, again, I have to draw from my experience with the restructuring of the national database. We were working on restructuring a legacy system, and they are very hard to kill. They're very like old systems that have been manipulated and built upon with several components across maybe 15, 20 years. They are die hard, basically. It's like Bruce Willis, get out of here. Our system, no, I mean, that's like immigration system we have is like, you will not kill it for over, it's going to take like 8 years, we estimate. And that's a conservative estimate. So we have to go a little by little, as said, and it's starting from prototyping, experimenting, and trying to draw each other in, and finding user cases that go across administrations. That's going to help a lot because you see that there is an immediate effect when you do that, and that draws attention to the procedure and the possibilities that are there as well. Another thing is like adoption, of course, follows convenience. Like think about healthcare, right? With digital ID, I can access the national health portal, and I can renew my medical receipts like in 5 minutes, and I get them directly to the pharmacy. So I don't have to go to the doctor, and when I go to the pharmacy, all I have to show them is just my digital ID on the phone. So that's so easy. It's so much easier than the old style. And if you just have the parallel here of cash versus credit card. I'm Italian. 10 years ago in Italy, cash was everywhere. And in some places it still is mainly. But I'm seeing that even small shops, and even for small amounts, there was still resistance. Before COVID, it wasn't really common to pay for, I don't know, a packet of chewing gum with your credit card. Now it's everywhere. You pay for a coffee, 80 cents with credit card. There is no resistance anymore. You win over it when everybody sees that there is much convenience in that and that everybody just uses that. So in time, that will happen. But in the meantime, we have to reduce friction and we have to highlight what's the win side of the thing. So yeah, I mentioned selling in my opening remarks, and I stick with that. I think we can actually have some, some billboard selling of these positive experiences. Hey, did you know that you can have your citizenship in like 1.5 hours instead of 2 years? Or,
Thanks, Raffaele. So similar to what Katrin said, so shout about the benefits, but like you say as well, nothing better to build trust than having great services. If the public has an experience of great services, they're going to have more trust, I think, in the government. Teemu, anything you want to add on interoperability or trust?
Yeah, well, about the trust, it's obviously easy to say that transparency, interoperability, standards adoption, regulatory compliance to ensure security, privacy, and data protection. That all is needed, but we quite often see digital IDs as a kind of a technical exercise, whereas we should kind of bring the individual to the center and deal with use cases that really bring additional value. And quite often we end up discussing about the different types of credentials that people have in their wallets, whether it's a driving license or a library card, but quite often forget the adoption in the consuming services side. And that needs to be in place in order for the digital IDs to actually bring value. So it's obviously nice to have a wallet full of credentials, but if you cannot use them anywhere, it really doesn't make much sense.
Brilliant. Thanks, Teemu. So make it human as well, and all of the benefits, kind of explaining all of the benefits. Thanks, Teemu. Will, we started with you. I'm going to end with you. Anything that I'm saying we, you and the UK maybe can learn from others in terms of how they've built this trust, but also really fascinating how Raffaele was saying how hard it is to get the interoperability across departments, not necessarily even starting to think about across countries.
Yeah. So in the United States, we have something called the National Information Exchange Model, which is the federal government's mandated standard to pass information across the federal government, not just an agency. I created the biometric domain back in 2012. And next year, we're going to be going to the information model and ask to create a domain specifically for digital identity. So it'll be across the government. We'll get together, we'll figure out all the data attributes that are needed for digital identity, and then we'll create this domain. And then part of the nice thing about the National Information Exchange Model is that there's a lot of documentation. So you document all the data attributes, but you also send in the exchange packages so if you implement an exchange, you provide that information to NEEM where people can go and look at it, so they don't have to start from scratch. They may have an 80% solution. So that's kind of how the United States is trying to deal with interoperability, because it's difficult alone just inside our department, and then we talk about external as well. So we all have vastly different jobs, and so but it's
well, thank you. And who knows, maybe one day we will have one ID each that works across the globe. That's the kind of, I guess, where we want to get to eventually. Thank you so much. We are out of time. Thank you to the audience for sending in so many great questions, but a huge thank you to our speakers, to Raffaele, to Teemu, to Katrin, and to Will. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time and your expertise. I think it's safe to say that as civil services and public services around the world continue on their digital transformation journeys, this question about digital IDs and how it's used is just going to get more and more central, I think, to those journeys. And a huge part of the public sector being able to meet all of the significant challenges that we are all facing at the moment. To the audience, we have sent you a very short questionnaire. I would be hugely grateful if you would take just a couple of minutes to fill that in so that we can make sure we keep giving you webinars on the topics that are of most interest to you. So that would be wonderful if you could do that. We will send a link with this video to everybody who registered so you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. And we will also, in a few weeks' time, be doing a write-up of the key issues that came out of our conversation. And again, we will share that with everybody who registered for the webinar. But for now, wherever you are, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to seeing you on another one of our webinars soon, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to all of you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.